we'll go ahead and get started here. It's good to have you all here today. This just after afternoon time here on a Thursday, and what is a busy time of year, I know, for folks finishing up and grading and scoring those exams and getting ready for summer, maybe sending your kids off to summer in the last week of school. So we're really grateful for people to be here and have an opportunity to learn today from our speaker. So I'm going to introduce our speaker. I'm Lindsay Smart. I'm here in the HSC Office for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and I'm always just grateful to be able to bring books and spoken word and poetry and all of that element into the work that we do, because I think that the work of our office and the work of literature are really tied together. So I am very excited for our speaker today. So a little introduction for Dr. Ying Xu, who received her BA and MA in English at Sichuan University in China, and her PhD in English from the University of New Mexico. Her specialized areas include 19th century American literature, Asian American literature, literary criticism and theory, immigrant writing, and Chinese women writers. She is a term faculty in the Department of English at UNM, offering composition, technical communication, and literature courses. She is a contributor to the Oxford University Press blog and contributed to Edith Eaton, Sui Sin Far, and Angel Island Poetry on Oxford bibliographies. Her articles have appeared in a variety of scholarly journals, and the most recent one, Teaching Asian American Literature and the Law in the Land of Enchantment, a case study, is included in MLA's special collection in Teaching Asian North American Texts. Besides teaching and scholarly work, she's also a translator. Her recent translation of Leslie Silko's Ceremony, published by Zhejiang Publishing Press of Art and Literature in China in 2023, is the first ever Chinese translation of Silko's work. She is currently translating Joy Harjo's Crazy Brave into Chinese. So thank you, Dr. Xu, for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you for having me. It's a great honor. I'm so excited because a couple of years back, I got invited by Oxford bibliographies to do an Angel Island project. And then later I did it at a conference. And so I'm working on a paper, but that paper never got finished. And so this is a great opportunity for me to expand my presentation and also do a case study, and then to maybe this summer, I think I'm going to finish it and send it out. And so thank you for the introduction, and thank you for everyone, for being here. I know it's like summer is already here, right? And yeah, it's a quiet Thursday afternoon. So I am a granddaughter of a migrant, a war refugee in China. Because I did not realize that until in the past 10 years, I have been thinking about more and more of this, because my dissertation was on immigrant writing. And so, my grandma was Cantonese, and then she became a refugee, flooding all the way to the north, living in Guangdong during the Sino-Japan War. And during the war, she lost everybody, everything. She became an orphan in the world. And I always feel like I'm this thin bloodline of my grandma carrying on. I'm also a first generation, of people in my family going to college, first one getting BA, MA, and PhD. Of course, the first generation of immigrant. So naturally, I feel like so affiliated with this project. So again, thank you for having me. Allow me to share my screen. I prepared some slides, kind of expanded, based on my conference presentation. And so I also see this as an opportunity to share stories. Of course, I'm going to give a little bit of background about Angel Island poetry. Have you heard of that? Angel Island we know, but Angel Island poetry. So a little bit of background of that, and a little bit theory or scholarly research. Yes. and then I will talk a little bit about this panopticon, this system, and how I view the island as the panopticon, and how I see that as prison writing, but in a different light. But then in the second part of, my presentation, I'm going to share with you just a long poem, because I think since we have so much time, rather than just like 10 minutes at a conference or 15 minutes, we have a lot of time. I'm going to show you this, like, this real poem written by one of the detainees. And then I'm also going to share with you a very intricate story about a female detainee. And I call that three glimpses into her life. And so we're going to end with a piece of music on Angel Island. So I hope we'll enjoy it. Okay. So let me see. Go. Okay. I have. So you see, like the subtitle of my presentation is The Panopticon of the Island and the Prison Writing in Angel Island Poetry. And so Angel Island poetry actually refers to Chinese poems carved on the barrack walls of the U.S. Angel Island Immigration Station in San Francisco Bay, which was in operation from 1910 to 1940. An estimated number of 50,000 Chinese were processed and detained during that period and left their words recording a dark chapter of racial exclusion in history. And so this, is a historical picture of this Angel Island Immigration Station. And this is the view from the cell, of the detainees' rooms. And, it's bad and it's just like exactly a prisoner's view. And so you will see to the left, there is because like they have a lot of buildings. The main building was the administration building, which was burned down in 1940, hence, ending like the immigration processing there. But this I found is the like detention barracks, for detainees. And so most new arrivals, so like especially like for Chinese people, they would be ferried, to this place. So the male detainees will be sent to detention barracks to live. Female detainees, at one occasion, stayed together with men, but later they got moved to the second floor of the administration, which I will explain why these days in this book you can rarely find poems written by female detainees, and also for children. So children under 12, they could stay with their mothers, and older than 12, they are separated. Boys would, go to like men's detention rooms, and the female would stay with their mom. So basically, which means a family would be separated. And also, like these new arrivals, they were not allowed any visitors in case, like they might collide with visitors, to trick the INS. And then to the right is a sample of the poem that, we got restored today. And so these poems were written in the classical style of Chinese poetry, reading from right to left, from, top to the bottom. And so they were first discovered by California State Park's Ranger Alexandra Weiss in 1970. And today, around 200 poems from the Angel Island barracks have been deciphered, which means deciphered means, some we still you could not, because so first the detainees, wrote poems using ink brushes on the wall, and they got, painted because the authority regarded them as graffiti. And then they started carving it on the wall. But still, the authorities did not like that. They ordered to, to repair this. And so the maintenance workers, they used the putty, to fill, these carvings and then paint it on top of them. And so it's amazing that, today they could recover this, because like some poems, they got like so deteriorated, like the wood, underneath got so deteriorated, you could not recognize the words. And so this is the book, and also, you know, the latest, the new, not show it. Okay, anyway, it's the edition we have. I recommend we get this one. And so let me talk about the editions. So when these poems, you know, were discovered by Alexander Weiss, you know, and then a couple of faculties from San Francisco State University, you know, they went there, they took photos, and they sent words out, you know, to the Chinese American community. And then, like later, you know, it went into the exhibit, and more people got interested. But then three people, they played this like significant role in compiling this book. So they were the editors of this book. They were like him McLean, and so like him McLean, Jenny Lin, and Judy Yung, and all of these descendants of ancient island detainees. And this was in the early 70s. And none of them are like scholarly writers. So like Lai was I think a mechanical engineer, and Jenny Lin worked at a TV station. She was also a poet. Recently, I think last week, 3 weeks ago, she, you know, was nominated. You know, she became the poet laureate for San Francisco. Good for them. And like Judy Yung, you know, was a librarian for the Chinese community library, and so later, you know, she went to graduate school and she became a scholar, and she, you know, was the director of Asian American program in UC I don't remember which campus, Santa Clara, and she built that program. But back then in the 70s, you know, they just did this work, and they did and so when we talk about this, you know, so in 1980 they self-published this book, because back then nobody was willing to publish a bilingual book. They said, oh, just like, you know, they are not literary texts, you know, like there was no much value there. But then, and so their edition and compiling of the book was first based on the restoring of those poems found on the wooden barracks. But then, fortunately, two detainees, Smiley Jan and Ted Ye, they both detained, you know, at different times at the beginning of the 20th century and then in the 1930s. So when they left, they copied. I copied a lot of poems. So they had like this, like, you know, yeah, like a copy of 90 poems or 78 poems. And a few poems, you know, we lost on the war, we could find in their work. You know, I almost wanted to share, you know, their stories as well, but we don't have time. But get the book, you know, you will see. And then we have, you know, the photographs. We also have, you know, the rubbings. And then later, Department of Parks and Recreation, they ordered, you know, this like architectural resource group to do an assessment of the poems. There was a very thorough and scholarly report of these poems. So it was first self-published in 1980, and then you know, a reprinting probably in 1983, and it was officially published in 1991 by the University of Washington's State Press. Good for that. And then, so in 2014, there was like a second edition, which was much expanded compared to the first one. By then, Him McLean already passed away, and you know, Judy Yung, unfortunately, 5 years ago in 2020, she passed away. So now we only have Jenny Lin here. So this is like a little bit background about the different editions of this book, The Island. And so for the current one, you know, like because the current one, the 2014 edition, based on the ARG's report on the first edition, and then this new latest edition provides new translations and has corrected errors in the first book and much expanded. This second edition also includes not only the 69 poems in the first edition, but adds another 66 poems previously appendixed, and along with poems on the walls of the immigration stations at Ellis Island in New York and at Victoria Island in Canada. It's a wonderful book. Okay. So, little bit like a story background. And so, so like several publications on genre translatability and transnationalism are important, to my article. So like Xiaohuang Ying, now is a very prominent scholar, of Asian American studies. So in 2000, he mentioned, like this writing as a kind of like a writing in the style of prison writing in a footnote to an article. That was the earliest time. Before that, in the 90s, we did not see any scholarly interest, in these poems. And then George Van Daan, I believe then in his 2008 article, Tears at the Ends of the Road, The Impasse of Travel, and The Wars at Angel Island, he examines the Angel Island poetry as the writing of detainment, a subsect of travel writing. And then Yung Huang contributes critically to our understanding of Angel Island poetry as travel writing. His 2008 article, The Poetics of Error, explains a subgenre of Chinese 提笔诗. So he revoked this genre of Chinese writing 提笔诗, which means writing on the wall. And so by examining the tantalizing relation between history and the travelogue in Chinese literary tradition and viewing Angel Island poetry as a type of 提笔诗, Huang critiques reductive reading of Angel Island poems, particularly corrections in English translations. So his one was a very critical piece. But then later I will argue 提笔诗, because 提笔诗, this genre, normally like people would be the literati, the more educated class, and also the nobles, people who had the ability to read and write, and mostly high, officials. But then these detainees, most of them, they were peasants, and most of them were illiterate or with very limited literacy, and also they did not write in traditional, classic like poems, and also they spoke Cantonese. And then a response, and this like article you see in 2008, that was a productive year for the scholarship in Angel Island poetry. And then a response to Huang's 2008 提笔诗, and so Sun Shali Wang elaborates on writing in situ, that is writing in place or in the situation in which it was originated, formed, or deposited. So his article also treats Angel Island poetry as a form of Chinese poetic tradition, 提笔诗, discussing materiality and the spatial and the temporal conditions of Angel Island inscriptions in producing and performing meanings. It's kind of almost like, I think he added a touch of transnational meaning there. And so in my article, I propose to examine Angel Island poems just as writing of incarceration. They are. So in relation to the panoptical establishment of the AAIS on Angel Island and the exclusionist system of power, analyzing the effects of prison writing of Angel Island detainees, as well as their choices of form and content. So, and I don't know if you're familiar with this or not. So this panopticon, this was a prison system devised and improved in Great Britain in the 19th century. So I will read a little bit, I prepared here, and you can read here, like my quotes here. So the basic setup of English philosopher Jeremy Bentham's panopticon is like this. Look at the picture. So there is a central tower surrounded by cells. So in the central tower is the watchman. In the cells are prisoners. Sometimes are, in Great Britain, workers, patients, condemned people, mad people, or schoolboys. The tower shines bright light so that the watchman is able to see everyone in the cells, while the prisoners are not able to see the watchman. So in this way, quote, the prison is seen, but he does not see. He is object of information, never a subject in communication, end of quote. As a consequence, the inmate polices himself for fear of punishment. So according to Foucault, the panopticon produced two things. So like on the one hand, quote, we find strategies of discipline designed to produce the obedient subject, not only in the prison systems, but also in the society. So the individual subjected to habits, rules, orders, and authority that is exercised continuously around him and upon him, probably them, and which they must allow to function automatically within the individual, end of quote. On the other hand, the panopticon provides surveillance. So this is called, self-policing. And the impact of, NG Island detention was long-term. And not only for those detainees, but for, their children and grandchildren. And even today, we see this, is happening again. So what NG Island detainees suffered on the island did not end with their leaving the detention center, because some got processed very quickly, 2 or 3 weeks, but some stayed there for 20 months. The effect is the disciplinary society's long-term control and subjugation of the prisoners. Thus, the panopticon carries, quote, a permanent, omnipresent threat, end of quote, to those, quote, within its reaches, end of quote. I think, Chinese immigrants definitely, they fit this category. Okay. And then, so on the left side, the photo, captures a scene of a medical examination of detained Chinese boys in the 1920s. Who stood in lines, half stripped, with fear, confusion, and distrust on, their faces. And imagine, these boys were separated from at least, one parent, and just got jailed with nothing to do. So later, in men's detention rooms, they started self-governing association, and a few detainees, with like some degree of education, they volunteered to teach boys, but girls, we did not see that. And then the right is a young Chinese immigrant, guess his age, being interrogated by the Bureau of Immigration on Angel Island in the 1920s. And the practice was like this, for Chinese travelers, they got this, what do you call it, the immigration inquiry panel, something like that, to interrogate them. For other travelers arriving at San Francisco, first class, second class, they got inquired on board, and they're allowed to land immediately. And if, some might, be brought to the island, such as Japanese travelers, and they would stay there just maybe for a couple of hours, and the second day, the third day, they are allowed to leave. But Chinese immigrants, they got this special treatments. There would be a panel of 2 immigration inspectors and one interpreter. But each time for different session, they will change the interpreter. They're afraid the interpreter might do a favor, to the detainee, and then a stenographer. So it's very, very, very scary thing. And so both photos show how detainees' bodies, were subjected to physical restrictions and regulation. The medical exams were disrespectful and oftentimes intrusive, with little respect to the detainees' feelings, especially for Chinese women, coming to the U.S. around that time. They were asked to disrobe themselves in front of strangers. That was, yes, in China, that would be the cause of suicide. And so, going back a little bit, and so, although on Angel Island, they were not literally a central tower, and the Chinese detainees were not locked in individual cell like were not locked in individual cells as Bentham's system. I want to talk about, this like metaphor of the panopticon, the island as a panopticon, or, the authority, this power as panopticon. So first, symbolically, the AIIS served as the tower, and Dai and as officials and staff functioned as watchmen. They possess information, right? And then secondly, like the tower in the Panopticon, the interrogators, immigration officials, and the staff at the island, they were the watchmen. Metaphorically, they have the light and they can observe prisoners all the time, which is enabled through their possession of power knowledge and their determination of fraud and truth. The position of the tower granted the officials and staff the power to arbitrarily interrogate the inmates and detainees without having to abide by rules of the court. No due process. And I thought about, like a couple of nights back, I thought about how to start my a presentation. I thought of asking you guys questions. I can still ask you. Okay, so if you are married, right, or if you are like in a relationship, tell me, if you did visit your spouse parents' house, tell me to which direction the spouse parents' house was facing, and how many pets like did spouse parents on, what are the names, where the pets' names, the age of these pets, and draw a picture of the layout of their house. These are the questions they got. Yes, and one detainee, and because, back then, after, the passage of Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, Chinese community basically became a bachelor society. So men were separated from their family, like wife, kids for many, 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 many years. But there are 5 classes got exempt. They are diplomats, merchants, students, teachers, and maybe a priest. And so most of them would came to the U.S. as, like the dependents of merchants because, they were exempted. So a Chinese man could be separated from his family, for 10 years or even longer. So one guy, returning from his visit to his family in China, got detained here, and still he, got a lot of questions. He forgot the exact ages of his 2 boys. He got deported. Yes. So, and then, so these like the questions were designed in a way to trap paper sons and paper daughters who claimed relationships with landed immigrants. Based on their interpretations of the interrogations, the INS officials decided discrepancies in testimonies and declared fraudulent claims. So not only the detainees would be interrogated. I read, one article, a boy of 12 years old got asked these 221 questions. Luckily, he passed. But also, there would be cross-examinations because, let's say he came with his mother. So mother was separated from him. And then later they would question the mother. They would compare the answers. More than that, each detainee needs to have witnesses. These witnesses, besides, let's say, okay, the father was this exempted Chinese merchant, living in the U.S. or even acquired U.S. citizenship. But this merchant also need to got 2 white witnesses to testify. Okay, I became very emotional, right? Okay, so yeah, this would be my reading of the island as a panopticon, the power structure. Yeah, and I also thought about giving you some like samples of the poems. So this is look at the picture first. This was in 1910, Chinese men's dormitory. You see, like about 200 or 300 men, they were placed in one room with these bunks, 2 tiers, 3 tiers, about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, and between probably 2 feet. You basically even cannot like sit between bunks. And from my reading of the book, and in men's dorm, there were no tables and chairs, and people could only just stay on their bed. And then this is poem 35. So altogether, I think there are more than 200 poems in the book, and each poem is giving a number for the sake of convenience of referring to them, and like no necessary order there, because all these poems got copied from the war, and all these poems were undated and unsigned, except for a few exceptions. That's understandable, right? Because they dare not to cite their names. And sometimes we see this very interesting spatial relationship between poems, which I'll talk about shortly. And then this one, I can read Chinese. This is in traditional Chinese. Everything here, I use the traditional Chinese because back then in the because the simplified Chinese did not appear until 1960s. Yeah, back then, everything was traditional Chinese. So I will read the traditional Chinese, and you can, read the English translation. 须眉七尺愧无声，倦服圈中俯仰人。百般忍辱徒呼负，斯人洒泪苍天河。This is a tall guy, 7-foot man, felt so ashamed of himself, but like nowhere to, to appeal. They just call sky God, because like in Chinese society, the sky is supposed, to represent justice, heaven, sky. But this was a different sky. And this is a little bit about, let me see. So bear with me. I can make this very short and go to the interesting part. Okay, I forgot. So this is my, like my reading of my use of, the theory of prison writing. I'm going to use like 2 tropes. Let me see. They, I'm a full page, my theory, but I will read it very quickly. Let me see. So first, because like most, like we read a little bit, prison writing, right? So mostly it's like this first person consciousness. A lot of them are, confessions. Some, are just like this, sense of injustice, right? A lot of self-reflection. And so I picked this trope as subject position, in relation to the discursive power. Obviously, Angel Island detainees writing do not fit the category of, this like self-conscious, first person, like writing, because it's not writing, it's limited. I read that they were not given pens and pencils. If they need anything, they need to, ask their relatives in San Francisco to send, things to them. And also I talked like earlier about this self-governing association, in men's dorm. And King Ye said that, because he stayed there very long, and he was elected chair twice. He said one of the things he did was like protest for what? For toilet paper and soap in the bathroom. He said in other rooms, for Russians, for other, immigrants, toilet paper was provided, by the station. But Chinese detainees, they have to prepare their own toilet paper. And so and then on the other hand, I want to mention a little bit about the paper sons and the paper daughters. Paper means. So due to the Exclusion Act of 1882, basically the coming of Chinese immigrants, got stopped. It was very, very hard for them to come to this country. So they developed strategies to circumvent these unjust systems. One of them was to claim, to be the son or the daughter of a U.S. citizen. And so that's why they call this paper son and paper daughters. And then in the 70s, when it's three authors, because they realized that the poems on the wall were not enough. And they wanted to interview people. But back then, due to the stigma and shame, sense of humiliation, or even just simply, fear of the authority, like very few people, would agree to be interviewed because if discovered they are illegal entry into the country, they would be deported, right? And so they started, with their family members but then, they also, because in Chinese culture, when you talk to the older generation, you have to be so respectful. So they are not, to challenge, to ask them to clarify things. So they have like a lot of questions, more than 20, 25 questions. They got detailed, answers, but those answers, sometimes are clean answers. And then later in the 80s, I don't remember exactly the time, maybe it's 1980, Congress passed this confession program for those illegal, Chinese immigrants to say, okay, if you confess, we're going to fix your status, you can get naturalized, etc., etc. And so a portion, like I think even less than 50%. Yeah. And then that's why when you do historical research, for Chinese immigrants, especially in that time period, it was very difficult. You will see they have more than two names, different names. And sometimes, if you have friends, from like San Francisco or California, like they might share story with you, said, one day suddenly my father told me we're going to change our last name from O to Chin. Yeah, see, that's because of this. And then the second trope I want to talk about this, like, collective, individualized yet collective mentality or consciousness. They referred to a lot of historical figures. The writings were, reflective. They talked about our ancestors, endured so much, but why we're, still the humiliation and hardship are still present here. They used a lot of literary allusions. That shows, a portion of them, were educated, because otherwise you could not use things like this. Let me move to the more interesting part. Otherwise, I can just keep talking, because this will be a paper, right? So this part will be more interesting because like we're going to read a long poem because I believe we have time. And also I'm going to share you with the story of one woman. So these are a few characteristics of the AIP. So the literary quality varied. Some are educated, some actually not, and they even could not write poems. And some, because they did not carry a rhyme book with them, sometimes it was very difficult to find the rhymes. So the literary value of those poems or sometimes couplets, were not that high. And they are all anonymously done. And diverse style, form, language. Some, because I said, some did not have education or maybe just minimum, like, several years of education, and they spoke Cantonese. There was confusion of Cantonese and the Chinese characters. They merged together sometimes, you feel it doesn't make sense. But the more interesting thing was I call that intellectuality of the poems, because we don't know when each poem was carved and written, right? And so their position, to each other was very interesting. I will show you the next slide. Like, let's say I found two poems, together. One was just like based on, let's say the first poem has, like 4 lines, each line 5 characters. The second poem, on top of that, each line added 2 poems. You see, right? This spatial freedom is like made it a new poem, but still showing the same feelings. And they also, like borrowed rhymes from each other, wrote on top of each other. This is very, very interesting, which we rarely see, in other kind of prison writing. And of course, they show these collective, feelings and emotions. Let me give you an example. Can you see? Okay, yes. Maybe move better this way. Okay. And you see this poem 111 and 112, these red characters are rhymes. They're the same characters. So both poems were about the death of a detainee. And they call that 可怜医师施药物. I call that medicine wrongfully prescribed. So he was dead. And the read, they are like almost the same. I give you a few minutes to read. They just feel like, oh, it's just so sad. He came here, went through so much. And then even like your soul, could not go back to your homeland. And then in like for 111, okay, because, the medicine wrongfully prescribed, and your corpse almost got cremated, because back in China, it was a great thing to cremate, one's body, and it should be buried in your ancestor graveyard. And the second one also, like they are together, I believe, on the wall, rhyming the same. And so this line, the fourth line, if you had the foresight, you should have regretted coming here. Now you are just like forever sad, forever resentful. But you came here with a great ambition, but yet just died prematurely. So very sad. All right. Can I move on? Okay. So, yeah. Next one, I want to, let's see, time. Okay. This is like a detention in the Mu'u, a long poem like written by one of the detainees. This one was not carved on the wall. It's very, very long. And this detainee, sent this long poem to the newspaper of Chinese World in 1991 in Shanghai and got published there. And let me just read like a few of that. Like if you're interested, of course, it's already in the book. And this is not numbered, it's in a different section called detention in the Mu'u. Mu'u is Cantonese for the wooden building, which refers to detention center. Yeah. Let me see, I will show you maybe this one. Talking about, when we bade farewell to our village home, we were in tears because of survivors' desperation. When we arrived here, we stared in vain at the vast ocean, our ship docked, etc., etc. And so here, the Mu'u is 3 stories high and as firm, built as firmly as the Great Wall. And then move on. Here, several hundreds of my countrymen are like fish caught in a net. And we lift our heads and look afar because they were only allowed for a walk once a week. The barbarian reed pipes add all the more to our anguish and grief. And so when we hear, these are all literary allusions to, when you got locked in a place, so how you felt. And then the cruel treatments. During the day, we endure a meal of crackers and cheese, almost like flies these days, just like Yang Hui eating rice and water. You see, this is like a literary reference. At night, we wrap ourselves in a single blanket, just like Ming Qian, wearing clothes made of rush. We wash in the morning in salty tidal water. We drink murky water to quench our thirst. In this newly open facility, neither land nor water in harmony with us. Yeah, and talking about, how they got sick. And then here, alas, Jie here. Alas, heaven, so desolate is this sight, is disheartening indeed. Sorrow and hardship have led me to this place. What more can I say about life? And then worse yet, a healthy person would become ill after repeated medical examinations. A private inspection would render a clothed person naked. Even for men, they feel this is like very, very humiliation. Okay, and let me see. So then again, this part is, jie. So alas, such tyranny of white race, such tragedy of the yellow souls, like a homeless dog forced into a confining cage, like a trapped pig held in a bamboo cage. So our spirits are lost in this wintry prison. We were worse than horses and cattle. Our tears shed on any icy day. We are less than the birds and the fowl. So he was there in winter time. So it's quite long. And I think I'm a little bit conscious of time. I'll stop here. Are you interested in a quick story? I call it 3 glimpses into Li Pengyou's life. Okay, so this is her. She was born like in Guangdong province in 1916, according to the first interview, because she got interviewed, actually she got interviewed twice, and there was another public hearing later in, actually before in 1953, but she did not talk about that in the first and second interviews. And so according to, the results of these two interviews, she got her passport at the age of 16, and then her mother promised her to a Chinese man 30 years older than her, like in the US. And so at the age of 23 in 1933, she came to the US. She was she got detained the longest for 20 months there. And then in this, because like these two interviews got combined, she just said, I had to be a filial daughter because her mom wanted her to marry this American citizen. And then later she could bring the whole family here. And so she said, I had to do this. And she just said, so much mental anguish. We all suffered emotionally. And so I have cried a bowl full of tears. Later, this became the title of an article, like by Judy Yung. And the interesting thing was that when asked about women's writings, she said that women wrote poems, on the walls of like the restroom, the bathroom, and they wrote them, in ink brushes. They did not carve them, and a lot of them about just like sadness, tears, etc., etc. They got like. And so when the immigration station got burned in 1940 because women's detention room were on the second floor, they got destroyed. That's why today we did not have any records about women's writings. But she said, she did, write a poem on a piece of paper that she asked to send to her. This was her poem. She just said, 远涉重洋到美洲，离别家乡已亲朋，谁知困在木楼中，不知何日得出头。Just said, I said goodbye to my family and friends, traveled, 10,000 miles. Actually, she said it's about 30-day, like a journey, but like got detained for so long. And then later so in 2002, when Judy Yung was, doing some research, she wanted, to verify some information about she already passed away in 1996, and then she contacted her daughters. And back then already, because now scholars, researchers had access to immigration archives, and based on, the Freedom of Information Act, requested her files. They found that in 1955, someone blew the whistle and reported her illegal entry to the U.S. So she was, called to appear in front of INS to decide, her case. And then she said, I wish to volunteer the whole facts in the case. Now this time is shocking. She said, yes, I was promised by my mother, to marry this old guy in the U.S. And then I came here, got detained for 20 months, on my way home to Hong Kong, several times I wanted to commit suicide. Even like in the detention center, I wanted to commit suicide. But not. In 1948, she re-entered the U.S. as a war bride. But she said, okay, in 1947, that man who was going to be her husband visited her mom. And then her mom invited a few friends to have dinner. Later, her mom said, this is your marriage ceremony. They got married. But this man told her, okay, not yet. You cannot come to the U.S. as my wife. You have to get a marriage certificate with the other guy because he has this, legitimate merchant status. And then they got marriage certificate. But the second guy said, on the night, said, you have to live with me, the life of a husband and wife. She rejected, and he forced her to do so. And then she traveled with the second guy back to the U.S. And then this guy dropped him off to the, supposedly husband. Then she learned, because the guy told her, her mother, my wife died. That's why I wanted to remarry. No, the first wife was still living there, and this guy wanted to have a concubine. And so she lived with them as a concubine and treated badly as a slave, like as a slave girl. And even like, after this husband, died, she was still treated as like a slave girl. And later she fell in love with another man. And because with the first man, she did not have marriage certificate. And she had to file a divorce with the second guy, to divorce him to be able to, marry, her true love. So, and Judy Yung called her case, just like these complexities and the ordeal of immigration for Chinese women at Angel Island. And so my conclusion was like this, writing the eye of the prison text back into language and into a broader communal identity of the layered transnational we. This is from I to we. And secondly, we read there and other Asian immigrants' writings in juxtaposition with other fields such as prison writing, law and literature, the politics of poetics, etc., could yield very meaningful readings of people's writing, back then. And I have prepared a piece of music, for us. This was composed by a Chinese composer, Huang Luo, and the good thing was that, so they have the narrator read the poem in Cantonese, and the translation is here.
夜靜微聞風潮聲，形影相情見景永。雲霧潺潺也暗天，松聲唧唧月微明。悲苦相連天相顯，受人獨坐倚窗邊。
This is the island of the Panactica. And these are my works cited. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Xu. That was amazing. All the poetry. I was like trying to soak it all in. I'll open it up to see if people want to share any thoughts or have any questions.
So any questions or, thoughts? I'm trying to read like the...
I see you, Delisa.
Oh, yes.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. Thank you so much for sharing. You gave voice to this very marginalized population and story. And that it's just so important to do so. And I was really touched by the ocean, the water, the journey. Many people who are brought here to the United States or who come voluntarily have that same memory. And so that was very good, very compelling. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm like, because I feel like that is my passion. And every time thinking about, I feel like these days, I don't know, somehow I have this strong connection with people 100 years ahead of me. Feel this like strong, and especially like grandmothers, because my grandmother was that generation. Yeah, she lost, we don't know, she lost the connections, with her family. Some of my family might have come in here and got detained. We don't know.
And also the fact of giving the perspective of the women's voices, in terms of by virtue of marriage and not marriage, and the whole idea of what that means for a woman. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other last questions or comments? If we wanted to learn more, what would we, where would you direct us? Obviously the book, but if there's, I took down the
Obviously,
name of that the prison writing book. I was like, well, that looks like a good read.
because, like I am a scholar of Asian American literature and studies. And sometimes when we go back to our grandmother, such as, Maxine Hong King, her woman warrior, we did not see stories like this. That's why we have to go further back. I think Angel Island poetry, offers this rare glimpse into their ideas, their thoughts, their struggles, and how they tried so hard to live their life.
Yeah. Incredibly powerful, and I think incredibly timely reading for people to really
Yes.
understand and then dig deeper and to recognize.
I don't know if you read the news about a Chinese woman detained in Arizona, committed suicide in the Yoma station. So she and she was 52, and she and another younger man, their car got stopped, and they had like a lot of cash in their car, and she overstayed her visitor's visa. And then she got like detained from California, transferred to Arizona 3 days later, and she just committed suicide. Yeah,
This is recent, or this
no,
is
this year,
just now? Yeah.
detained on March 26th, and she died on March 29th.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, when I read the news, I had nightmare because, I'm very familiar with this detention, and people said, oh, she might be criminal because she possessed, a large sum of money. Due process, okay. But then what drove her to such a desperate decision? And it was sad there. Did she have family? Yeah, did she have kids? How about her parents, siblings? How about just like her dreams? So
Yeah, there's one question in the chat. Rebecca asked around the poetry being recognized in China. There you are, Rebecca.
yes,
Yeah.
like I think in the
Just to say, I'm sorry, but this question seems so trivial after what you just explained, which is very present day suffering. And I'm terribly sorry to hear what you just shared with us. It's horrifying. But yeah, I was academically curious to know whether or not this poetry has a place in Chinese culture, not
yes.
just Chinese American culture.
Yeah, like this, like poems, poetry is recognized in in Chinese literary text, but not. And I think the research also simultaneously, started in 1970s when these three authors were doing their research here. Because in the end, I think it's a transnational relationship. Because when we talk about the immigrants, I always felt like, hey, what you did, back then did not count, and only here, is legitimate. But no, and we got, like, that was the homeland, right? In the shaping years happened there. We still have connections there. You cannot just like split into two, the part is Chinese, the part is US. I think we are all these miraculous, merging of being. And because of our different experiences, we are becoming this richer being. Yeah, I think I do see kind of like a transnational consciousness in there. But the good thing about I think in the 90s, like 13 Angel Island poems made into American literary canon, and they were selected, included by the HIS, American literature. And now in high schools, they are also teaching these poems. But still, like in colleges, say for example, I'm a literature major, and in my 7-year program, I only studied one short story by this Asian American writer. I read so many texts, and so I think it's very important for we, to do historical research and also, make connections between the present and the past and looking, to our future. Yeah, like this past semester, I just finished teaching a literature class, and we used one of poems by Joy Harjo. Joy Harjo. The poem is called A Map to Our Future. And so according to her, it does not matter, where you start, where you end. The important thing is that, you have to draw your map, toward your future. And everyone, I think we need to. It's not maybe it's not, two-dimensional. It's just like everywhere, non-linear, spatial, and even happening here. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. You're welcome. Did I miss any questions? I'm reading chats right now. Yeah. Oh, so the music did not play, right? And so it's just like on YouTube. Oh, 2 years ago, I think Huang Luo and his team came to the U.S. I watched they only played maybe just a portion of that oratorio. And I watched that, I was in tears because, he used this like a portion of like Chinese tradition of chanting and singing that. And I wanted to include, the first poem here, but nowhere could I find YouTube videos of the first poem, because the first poem reads, "Oh, you see, when I see this green ocean charming in front of me, I finally arrived. It's a peaceful place." But yeah, yes, I was in tears back then, just like watch that. Still today, when I read the first poem, that kind of anticipation, expectations, hopes. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
It was a great
thank you. It's so, I know that some folks have transitioned, but I just want to thank you for this. And I think really expanding maybe all of our understanding of something that is not highlighted enough, or I guess at all, in many places. So I'm going to be learning more, and I'm definitely going to be reading all the poetry because I love poetry.
Yes.
I look forward also to your translations of the, I just want to follow your work. Like, I think the interesting concept, the Joy Harjo's work, and
Joy Harjo's book, I finished the last year. It will come out in the second part of this year. And I am fascinated with grandmothers. My own grandmother, this, Leslie Silko, Joy Harjo, all these grandmothers. I just feel like my mission is to continue my grandmother's bloodline and, all these grandmothers' bloodlines. Yeah.
And we'll be following your work, and we'll have another Zoom presentation to keep us up to date on what you're doing. But thank you very much, and thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Like, yeah, I feel like the theory part, I should just like remove it a bit, focus more on.
No, we needed that. I think it's a balance, and now we've got the book and the places that we can go, and I think that you capture the things that we needed to hear.
Oh yes, the theory.
I was Googling panopticon. I was like, ooh, that's a term. There's a book called Panopticon that came out. But there's other stuff too about the circuit. It's actually really interesting. If you're interested in doing a little bit of reading, there's some interesting stuff to learn about. So Google it, use AI, and find out where to go next.
Now this talk is so critical, for me. I'm going to, I feel like more motivated to finish my paper because I'm going to use the theory of panopticon and to finish like my analysis of the poems. But just I feel like we need to know all the stories, and also we need to be storytellers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your Thursday, and we'll
have
see
a great
you at the
summer.
next one. Yes, lots of reading.
Oh yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Did you